Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reigniting Small Business. I'm Laura Richards, and I'm here today with Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute. And we're going to be joined today once again by Patricia Newby. She is the president and founder of Strategic Business Partnerships. And I guess, Patrick, what we should do is tee up this discussion we're going to have today for a second. We're talking about group culture, why it's important, how do we change it, when do we know that we need to change it, and how is it being impacted, all of those things, by being a distanced or remote workforce.
Yeah, let's start this whole conversation just real quickly before we bring Pat on with why it's important. And I think anyone who's ever tried to implement change in a organization of any sort runs into the culture problem, which is, the culture has adapted around what is there then, and culture tends to protect the status quo. And so what you end up seeing is that folks are well-intentioned trying to make change, but the culture is not even allowing it. I think it's also one of those things in business that gets overlooked. We spend a lot of time fixing our infrastructure, trying to, do stuff with our personnel, the numbers, all of that. But a lot of times culture is one of the most important things that either means success or doesn't. I think as an example of this, I know nonprofit boards are a place where a lot of culture studies have taken place. And one of the things they've discovered is that a lot of times, nonprofit boards are sort of famous for being dysfunctional. And so there's always an attempt at some point within an organization of leadership to bring people in to change the culture of the board. Like, let's get a board that's going to be more innovative or more accountable or whatever it is they're looking to do. And the typical approach is, let's get a few new board members on who exemplify the traits that we're looking for, bring them on, and they're going to change the culture. But what they find is that culture doesn't work that way. In our society, we believe very strongly in the individualistic principles, right? That the individual and their willpower will overcome everything. But what we actually find is that group norms are what overcomes things. So folks end up either complying to the culture or leaving the culture, right? It's too strong for them to fight it. So in the nonprofit boards, what they found real quickly is that they bring on these people, and within 2 or 3 months, these folks have either left the board because it's not their thing, or they've conformed to behaving exactly as the board has always behaved. So the only thing that ever seemed to work is if they brought folks together and said, hey, we're bringing you on this board to change the culture. And in order to do that, we're going to support you. We're going to have meetings where we discuss how it's going. All of you new folks who've been brought on for that purpose are going to meet quietly, almost as a pseudo hidden committee, where you discuss how hard it is to change culture and support each other. And that sometimes has the effect of actually changing the culture. But it's hard. Culture change is very hard. So why don't you go ahead and give us a definition of what we're talking about when we say corporate culture?
All right, bear with me because I am going to be reading this. So corporate culture refers to the beliefs and behaviors that determine how a company's employees and management interact and handle all outside business transactions. Often, corporate culture is implied, not expressly defined, and develops organically over time from the cumulative traits of the people the company hires. A company's culture will be reflected in its dress code, business hours, office setup, employee benefits, turnover, hiring decisions, treatment of clients, client satisfaction, and every other aspect of operations.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent definition. So let's get Pat into this discussion.
All right, sounds good. And here she is. Hello, welcome, Pat.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Patrick. Good to see you again. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
So listen, guys, I'm going to depart this conversation for a little while. I look forward to listening to it actively like the rest of our listeners here. And I'm going to rejoin you towards the end of the broadcast to see if I can pop in with any unanswered question either I have or maybe a listener might have. And we'll wrap this thing up.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Look forward to enjoying the conversation.
So Pat, when we last had you on the podcast, we asked you what were some of the topics that would interest you in coming back and discussing, and you threw out culture. So what was the reason for that, and what's your interest in the group culture phenomenon?
Well, Patrick, as my business has evolved over the last 8 years, I find myself gravitating to leadership and culture. If I look back to my days in corporate America, it was something that I was passionate about. The environments that we create, that we have our teams work in, the impact that it has on them, and the need to change and the difficulty around changing, and who we think should be making the changes. So culture is critical. The saying is culture eats strategy for breakfast or lunch or dinner or whatever the meal is.
All the meals.
And so I think culture is important, as a business coaching consultant and strategist. When I work with new business owners, it's something that I stress just right off the bat, the values, the vision, the mission, your why, your purpose, because I feel it's important that as you build your team, people understand what that is. And so my reason for doing that is for those business owners to take a more active role in defining the culture for their businesses, because as you said, they tend to evolve and they don't always evolve in the way that you would like them to evolve. And it impacts so much about the day-to-day operations, how we interact with our clients, all of our stakeholders. It can make or break a company.
And I think it's interesting too, at least when I'm working with an owner or a leader of a group or an organization, there is a sense in them a lot of the times that all they have to do is sort of put forth a decree that culture will change and that it will change. And that is so far from the truth, at least as far as I've seen. And I've also found it difficult sometimes to convince those leaders and owners that it's worth the effort. Like they just think that, well, no, the culture is culture. Let's get on with business, right? So have you had a lot of are they receptive to your attempts to show them the importance of culture? Did they just go along with it to go along with it? Have what are the stories you've seen of proving that, this is as important as you say it is?
I find it more accepting when I'm working with new business owners. So they understand it. They're more into purpose and why. And they're open and they're there to learn. They're willing to listen and try to understand how they can put their best foot forward to get their company launched and going in the right direction. It is more difficult with established businesses because typically when they bring you in, they're bringing you in because they want to solve a problem or they want to grow. And so their focus is on how am I going to double revenue or break into a new market. And they don't always see the connection between culture and who they stand for and what the company stands for and how that can help them to recruit the right people on their team, to kind of have it be their differentiator. So why would someone work with your business versus another business that does the same thing? It could be because of your culture. And so I think, just having them step back and realize that when you talk about growth, it's not always growth in terms of revenue, but growth can manifest itself in a number of different ways. And then to understand the impact that culture will have. So if someone is coming to me because they have an issue, especially, so suppose you can't hire enough people, suppose you have this revolving door. Well, that's probably going to be a culture issue. And so let's take a look, let's see what's going on, and let's see what we need to address. So one, I think the first step with a business owner is accepting the fact that you need to take a step back and look at the entire business and see what is going on. And then what do you as the leader and owner need to change? It's very easy to tell everybody else what they need to do, what they need to change. It is a lot more difficult to then take responsibility and say, oh, our policies, our procedures, our practices, the way that we communicate with people, that's what's driving our culture in the way that is unacceptable to me. And so, your example with the nonprofit boards, which I'll have to say I've experienced. And so what I would say, while they're looking to bring other people in to help change, I think that's passing the buck. I think they first need to take responsibility for the culture change that they wish to see, because as long as they're allowing that behavior that they want to change without directly addressing it, you're basically saying your behavior is okay. And then to bring someone else in, that's a real hurdle, to come in and try to change the behavior of others. And the scenario you gave was like the ideal scenario. They say, we're going to help you. Typically, they don't say they're going to help you. Typically, they say, come in and help us change this. And they sit back and they watch and wonder why it's not happening fast enough, or wondering why you're getting frustrated and leaving before it actually happens. So as a leader, there's some, when it comes to culture, when it comes to behavior, there's some very difficult decisions we have to make. So if Sally is an excellent accountant, but Sally can't get along with anyone, we have to step back and decide if Sally is the right person for the team.
Yeah.
And so when you allow Sally to continue with the behavior that is offensive to other members of the team, even though you say the culture is one of respect and honesty and teamwork, your behavior is saying, Sally gets the job done. That's what's important to me. So when you decide what you want the culture to look like, not only do you communicate it verbally, but your actions need to reflect unconditionally what those values are, what those beliefs are, and what you want the behavior to be. Otherwise, it's a mixed message, and people are most likely going to go with what they see versus what they hear.
So what is a typical strategy that you would bring to going into an organization where leadership has acknowledged that okay, we are going to go ahead and try to change this culture and it needs to be done? What strategy do you typically take to get that started and make it happen?
Okay, so first it's assessing. So let's look at the behavior. What is it that you are not happy with? What is it that you think needs to change? Then let's take an honest assessment, evaluation of what's driving that behavior. So what are the contributors to it? And being strong enough and having the courage to recognize that you as the leader may be part of the problem. And whatever it is, just acknowledging it. So you don't have, so at first just accept it. Accept what you're being shown. So you have someone come in as an objective third party, at least listen to what they have to say. So then once you identify what those triggers are for the cultural behavior that is not what you want, you then kind of decide, well, what's the ideal scenario? What do you want it to look like?
Yeah.
And then what are you willing to do to get that ideal state? And then we'll talk about a strategy and a plan.
Yeah, one of the things that I see a lot, and I would not even touch it, is if you're talking to an owner or a leader who's saying, yeah, change culture. That's all fine. I just want to see a different result, right? I'm not really worried about how we're doing it or what it is. I just want to see a different result. I can tell you out of the gate, that's a formula for disaster. That person doesn't understand enough for that result to change, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's take that, your best effort to go to a skeptical owner who looks at you and says, okay, why culture, right? Why are we focusing there? Shouldn't we be focusing on the finances, or shouldn't we be focusing on training, or shouldn't we be focused on something else? What's your answer to convince them that culture is where we need to start?
So part of it is understanding what's the real problem. So identifying the right problem. So if you're going to focus on something, let's make sure we're focusing on something that's going to drive the outcome that you're looking for. And so if culture bothers people, don't say culture.
Okay.
Let's just, what's going on in the business? What is it that's happening that you don't like? What do you want to change? And let's talk about it that way. So because sometimes when you talk about those, people might think of culture as the warm and fuzzy stuff, and they're not into warm and fuzzy.
Right.
And so, our goals as coaches and consultants is to help them to get where they need to be. And if it means we don't say culture, then we don't say culture.
But ultimately, change impacts culture. And since culture, the status quo culture is the protectant of the status quo, you're inevitably going to have to change culture to make substantial change, right?
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't mean that you don't still drive to change the things that need to be changed. I think the important part is understanding and having them to realize to get this desired outcome, you need to take these actions.
Okay. So so now we know that the vast majority of people who are in a culture and have been in that culture, that they're comfortable in that culture.
Oh, absolutely.
And comfort is one of the hardest things to get humans to give up, right? Even though there's a promise of even better comfort over there, but we don't want to move from where we're at. So when, you've got leadership convinced, owners are convinced we're going to take on this culture, we're going to change it. Now, how do we communicate it to staff, employees, folks, stakeholders? How do we introduce the idea that we're going to change culture here? And what does that mean to them then?
So the problem, I think, in that approach is you're telling them after you've decided what needs to be done. They need to be a part of the discussion. So, you need multiple perspectives as you're looking at the organization. If you feel like there's something that needs to be changed, so you have your perception of what it needs to be, but your team also has their perspectives. So this is a good time to open the door, share the concern, discuss the context in which you want to do whatever it is you're doing, why you think it benefits the organization and each one of them, and invite their feedback. And then you get to see it from their perspective. It may change some of your thinking, but at least it allows them to share their thoughts so you can understand how they see it, because we don't always get it right as the leaders and the owners, because we're looking at it from a certain, with a certain maybe outcome in mind. So we really need to, because we want them to be a part of the change. So we need to invite them in at the beginning of the process. And we need to make sure that we ask them the questions or invite them to the conversation. And then we need to acknowledge what they have contributed. And change is a process. So, one of the training programs that I have is a change management program. And so there are different phases to change. People are resistant to change because it's all about the unknown. As bad as the current situation is, at least they know what to expect when they come in the next day. They may still be upset about what to expect, but with change, they just don't understand what's next. How is it going to impact them? And so I think laying out what that process looks like, helping them through every stage of the process, because there are some stages where you can get stuck. And having them to realize this is going to be a very difficult part to get past, and be with them every step of the way so that what they are experiencing, they'll know that it's not unusual, that in fact, what they're experiencing is a part of the process, and that you're there to help them through it.
So one of the most interesting things that's happened because of COVID is this all of a sudden dramatic shift to remote workforces. And I think that, there are a lot of folks out there who have been somewhat used to this, including companies that the entire workforce has always been remote. And what they understand, that a lot of these folks who are used to gathering together, is that culture transcends location. I don't need to be with the other people in this organization for the organization's culture to exert influence over how I behave and what I do, right? So talk a little bit about the idea of remote culture and what challenges does that present for folks who are trying to maintain culture or even have changes in culture with the remote workforce?
Yes, so so a couple of things. COVID has kind of forced this change. So it didn't go through the process of this is what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? It was the way it had to be. If people wanted to continue keep the business going, to get paid, to have their jobs. It was something they needed to do. So, there are several studies, and some say that, people like remote working because they have more work-life balance. You're not spending time on the road. However, the real challenge is in being connected and being engaged.
Yeah.
And so how do you help people to feel like they're a part of the organization, and that they understand what's going on in the organization when the physical presence isn't there, where you can just look up from your desk and see some things going on, and it generates some questions, and you go talk to someone, or you hear someone, you overhear conversation. So it's really about, how do we keep people connected? If we have a great culture, what are those things that we do to perpetuate that great culture? And then what does that look like in a remote environment? So it may not be the same activities, but what is it that the team gets from that activity that helps to build the culture? And then what does the new activity need to look like in the virtual environment? And so suppose you don't have a great culture. So what I can see happening in some remote work is that people wonder, are they really working? Are they really getting the work done? And so then you have all these meetings and all these check-ins. And so the message that you're sending is, I don't trust you to get the job done. I feel that you have to be here. I have to see you. I have to watch you to really feel comfortable that we're going to be able to make it all happen and to keep things moving. And so you want to be careful of things like that. So I would say, first of all, you need to set the expectations for remote work. It's not just, okay, just start working from home and we'll see how this thing works out. There really needs to be some conscious thought, just as in creating a culture within any environment. These things require intentionality. You have to think about it, you have to lay it out, you have to test some things, you need to tweak them until you come up with that formula and something that works. And so when we look at remote work, some organizations didn't even have the technology to enable people to work from home. So, as leaders, it's our responsibility to make sure that our teams have everything they need to get the job done. Our role is to make their job easy. So we're facilitators. And so then we need to talk and get some feedback. What's working for you in this remote environment and what is not? And different people will have different needs. And so there won't be a one-size-fits-all solution, but willing to do the extra work to connect with people to see, what do we need to do that allows them to do their best work and be their best selves, whether they're in a brick and mortar building or whether they're in a corner of their kitchen with an office set up. What do they need to do the job that I'm asking them to do?
So let's bring Laura back into the conversation at this point. So Laura, you had an interesting situation where you had two businesses, two franchises, same restaurant and all, but they were far apart. Was there a culture that transcended both, or did they have their individual cultures?
I think both. So, like you said, leadership sets the tone. And I think that the tone of both stores was really, really similar. My general manager in my Bowie location, though, was a really different personality than I was. And his priorities, big operational priorities, were the same as mine. But I don't think anybody has the same exact love for the business as the owner does. So I was a little bit more of a precision person, wanting to go really by the book. And he had a little bit more of a loose culture and a very, very friendly culture. And when I say friendly, I don't mean friendly to the customer. I mean a lot of interpersonal relationships with the staff that, as an owner, I think you don't necessarily have that. But in terms of what the customer experience was and the overarching kind of vibe, they were the same, because he bought into the culture that I wanted to set. And I had very clear expectations around, we're here for the customer. You check it at the door. We're spunky. We have personality. This is a home away from home. Customer's always right. And those truisms that I kind of always touted were internalized, I think, by the staff, and they were both amazing. I was really fortunate, but it was also very well articulated. So I think your conversation it resonated with me. And Pat, I think one of the most interesting parts of this is, where this led to in terms of the pandemic and remote work. Because that culture of trust that you talked about, I think people are finding out who has it and who doesn't, right? And the proof is in the pudding too. It's also, as you said, incumbent on the workers to show that they're productive in this fashion. So some great takeaways from your conversation today. So thank you both.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to be digging into more topics with you in the future. So be prepared to think about what you want to talk with us next time here on Reigniting Small Business. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.